Kate Williams never imagined her life would change so dramatically on a cold Tuesday morning in March. She was just an ordinary nurse working at St. Mary's Hospital in London, rushing between patients and trying to keep up with her endless duties. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a messy bun, and her scrubs were usually wrinkled from long shifts that stretched well beyond their scheduled hours. That morning started like any other. Kate woke up at 5:30, grabbed a quick cup of coffee and hurried to catch the early bus to the hospital. She had been working in the pediatric ward for 7 years, caring for sick children with the same gentle touch and warm smile that made her patients feel safe. Her colleagues often joked that Kate had magic hands because even the most frightened children would calm down when she entered their rooms. The hospital was busier than usual that day. A terrible accident had happened on the highway the night before, and several families were rushed to the emergency department. Kate found herself assigned to help wherever she was needed most. As she walked through the corridors, she noticed something strange happening in the main lobby. Security guards were positioning themselves at different points, and hospital administrators were walking around with serious expressions on their faces. Kate didn't think much about it at first. Hospitals often had important visitors, and she was too focused on her patients to worry about whoever might be coming. She spent the morning helping Dr. Peterson with a young boy who had broken his arm, and then she assisted with medication rounds for the entire pediatric ward. The children loved her because she always found ways to make them laugh, even during painful procedures. Around noon, the hospital director made an announcement over the intercom system. He explained that they would be receiving a very special visitor that afternoon, and all staff should maintain their highest standards of professionalism. Kate rolled her eyes slightly as she prepared lunch for little Emma, a 6-year-old girl who had been in the hospital for 3 weeks battling a serious illness. Emma had become Kate's favorite patient, though she would never admit that out loud. The little girl had lost all her hair from chemotherapy treatments, but her bright blue eyes still sparkled with hope. She loved to draw pictures and always asked Kate to sit with her during meal times. Emma's parents lived far away and could only visit on weekends, so Kate had become like a big sister to her. As Kate helped Emma with her soup, the little girl looked up with excitement in her eyes. She had heard the nurses talking about the important visitor, and her imagination was running wild with possibilities. Emma asked Kate if it might be a movie star or maybe even a princess. Kate smiled and told her it could be anyone. But what mattered most was that Emma continued to get better and stronger every day. The afternoon brought more security personnel and several people in expensive suits walking through the hospital halls. Kate noticed that some areas were being cordoned off, and certain elevators were restricted for staff use only. She had never seen such elaborate preparations for a visitor before, but she remained focused on her duties. She had 3 more patients to check on, and then she needed to help with the evening medication distribution. Kate's shift was supposed to end at 6 o'clock, but the head nurse asked if she could stay a bit longer because they were short-staffed. She didn't mind working extra hours, especially when it meant spending more time with patients like Emma. The overtime pay would also help her save money for the small apartment she was hoping to rent closer to the hospital. As evening approached, the atmosphere in the hospital became even more tense and formal. Kate could hear helicopters circling overhead, and she noticed that all the window blinds on the upper floors had been closed. Whatever was happening, it was clearly much more important than she had initially thought. She began to wonder if perhaps a member of the royal family was coming to visit, though such events were usually announced in advance to the public. Kate finished her rounds and was preparing to head home when she heard Emma calling for her from down the hallway. The little girl sounded upset, so Kate quickly walked to her room to see what was wrong. Emma was sitting up in her hospital bed, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. She had been watching the news on the small television in her room and had seen something that frightened her terribly. Emma pointed at the television screen with a shaking finger. The news was showing footage of a terrible building collapse in the city center. An old apartment complex had suddenly given way during the afternoon, trapping dozens of families inside. The rescue teams were working frantically to pull survivors from the rubble, but the reporters were saying that many people were still missing. Kate sat down on the edge of Emma's bed and gently took her small hand. She could see the fear in the little girl's eyes, and she knew exactly why Emma was so upset. The collapsed building was in the same neighborhood where Emma's grandmother lived, The elderly woman had been planning to visit Emma the next day, and now they couldn't reach her on the phone. Kate immediately called the hospital's social services department to help locate Emma's grandmother. While they waited for information, Kate stayed with Emma, holding her close and reassuring her that everything would be all right. She told Emma stories about brave princesses and magical knights to distract her from the scary images on the television screen. The social worker arrived within an hour with both good and concerning news. Emma's grandmother was safe and had been evacuated to a temporary shelter, but she had suffered a minor injury to her leg and was being treated at another hospital across town. The woman was asking desperately about Emma and wanted to make sure her granddaughter knew she was okay. Emma burst into tears of relief when she heard her grandmother was alive, but she was still worried about the injury. Kate promised Emma that she would personally make sure her grandmother received the best possible care. She spent the next 2 hours coordinating between hospitals, arranging for Emma's grandmother to be transferred to St. Mary's so they could be close to each other. While Kate was making phone calls and filling out paperwork, she noticed that the hospital's main entrance had been completely cleared of visitors. Red velvet ropes had been set up, creating a pathway from the entrance to the elevators. Fresh flowers had been placed throughout the lobby, and every surface had been polished until it gleamed under the bright lights. Kate was so focused on helping Emma and her grandmother that she had completely forgotten about the mysterious important visitor. She was walking past the lobby around 9 o'clock when she saw a convoy of black cars pulling up outside. Security personnel immediately surrounded the vehicles, and Kate could see cameras flashing in the distance where reporters had gathered behind barriers. She paused for just a moment, curious about who could possibly warrant such an elaborate reception. Then she remembered that Emma was waiting for news about her grandmother's transfer, so she hurried back to the pediatric ward. Kate had always believed that her patients were the most important people in the hospital, regardless of whoever else might be visiting. Emma's grandmother arrived at St. Mary's just before 10 o'clock that evening. Despite her injured leg and the traumatic experience she had endured, the elderly woman insisted on being wheeled directly to Emma's room. Kate watched from the doorway as grandmother and granddaughter embraced, both of them crying tears of joy and relief. The older woman, whose name was Margaret, thanked Kate repeatedly for everything she had done to bring them together. She explained that Emma was her only family, and the thought of not being able to see her granddaughter had been more painful than her physical injuries. Kate felt her heart warm as she watched the two of them holding hands and talking quietly together. Kate finally prepared to leave the hospital around 11 o'clock that night. It had been one of the longest days of her career, but also one of the most rewarding. She had helped reunite a family during one of the most difficult times in their lives, and that feeling of accomplishment was worth more than any overtime pay she might receive. As she walked toward the exit, Kate noticed that the lobby was still decorated with flowers and red ropes, but the mysterious visitor had apparently already left. She wondered briefly who it might have been, but her thoughts quickly returned to Emma and Margaret. Kate was already planning how she could adjust her schedule the next day to spend more time with them. Kate stepped out into the cool night air and took a deep breath. The reporters and cameras were gone, and the street had returned to its normal quiet state. She walked to the bus stop, thinking about how strange it was that such an important visit had happened on the same day as the building collapse. Sometimes life seemed to throw everything at you all at once, both the terrible and the wonderful. The bus ride home gave Kate time to reflect on the day's events. She thought about Emma's courage in the face of fear, Margaret's determination to reach her granddaughter despite her own pain, and the countless other small acts of love and kindness she had witnessed throughout her shift. These were the moments that reminded Kate why she had chosen to become a nurse in the first place. Kate arrived at work the next morning to find the hospital buzzing with unusual excitement. Her colleagues were gathered in small groups, whispering and showing each other something on their phones. When Kate asked what was happening, her friend Sarah pulled her aside with wide eyes and an expression of disbelief. Sarah explained that the important visitor from the previous evening had been none other than the king himself. He had come to the hospital unannounced to visit victims of the building collapse, and apparently he had spent hours walking through different wards, talking to patients and their families. The royal visit had been kept secret from most of the staff to ensure it remained a genuine, private gesture rather than a formal ceremony. Kate was shocked to learn that she had been working just floors away from the king without even knowing it. Sarah showed her photos that had been taken during the visit, and Kate could see the genuine compassion in the king's face as he spoke with injured survivors and their loved ones. She felt a strange mix of regret for missing such a historic moment and pride that her hospital had been chosen for such an important visit. The news quickly spread throughout the hospital that the king had been particularly moved by the stories he heard from the building collapse victims. He had apparently asked detailed questions about their medical care and had promised to personally ensure that all survivors would receive whatever support they needed for their recovery. Several patients reported that he had stayed much longer than originally planned because he didn't want to leave. While people were still in pain, Kate checked on Emma and Margaret early that morning and found them both in much better spirits. Emma's grandmother was recovering well from her leg injury, and the little girl was excited to have her beloved grandmother so close by. Emma had heard about the royal visit from the other children in the ward, and she was disappointed that she had fallen asleep and missed seeing the king. Margaret, however, had been awake when the king visited their floor. She told Kate in hushed, reverent tones about how he had stopped at Emma's bedside and watched the sleeping child with such tenderness in his eyes. The king had asked Margaret about Emma's condition and treatment, and when he learned about the little girl's battle with cancer, he had stood there in silence for several long minutes. Kate listened to Margaret's account with growing amazement. The elderly woman described how the king had gently touched Emma's small hand while she slept, and how he had whispered a quiet prayer for her recovery. Margaret said she had never seen such genuine emotion from someone in such a powerful position, and the experience had given her renewed hope for Emma's healing. Throughout the day, Kate heard similar stories from other nurses and patients who had encountered the king during his visit. Everyone spoke about his warmth, his sincere interest in their well-being, and his apparent reluctance to leave while people were still suffering. Kate began to understand why the visit had been kept secret. It had allowed the king to connect with patients as human beings rather than as subjects meeting their monarch. Kate spent her lunch break thinking about how different her perception of the previous evening might have been if she had known about the royal visit while it was happening. She realized that in many ways she was glad she hadn't known. Her focus had remained exactly where it should have been, on caring for her patients and helping Emma reunite with her grandmother. She had been doing her job the way she always did, with complete dedication and love. That afternoon brought unexpected news that would change everything for Kate. The hospital director called her into his office, along with several other nurses who had been working the previous evening. Kate assumed they were going to be briefed about the royal visit, or perhaps warned about maintaining confidentiality regarding the king's presence in the hospital. Instead, the director explained that the king had specifically asked about the nursing staff who had been caring for the building collapse victims and other patients during his visit. He had been impressed by the dedication and compassion he had witnessed, and he wanted to do something special to recognize the extraordinary work being done at St. Mary's Hospital. Kate learned that she had been selected, along with 3 other nurses, to receive a special commendation for her service during the crisis. The recognition would be presented at a formal ceremony at Buckingham Palace in 2 weeks' time. Kate could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had never imagined that her ordinary work caring for patients would be noticed by anyone outside the hospital, let alone by the king himself. The director explained that Kate had been chosen specifically because of her actions in helping Emma reunite with her grandmother during such a difficult time. Someone had reported to the king about how Kate had gone above and beyond her normal duties, working late into the night to coordinate between hospitals and ensure that a frightened little girl could be with her family during a traumatic experience. Kate felt overwhelmed by the honor, but also confused about how the king could have known about her specific actions. She had simply been doing what any caring nurse would do in the same situation. The idea that her small act of kindness had somehow reached the attention of the highest levels of the royal family seemed almost impossible to believe. As Kate walked home that evening, her mind was spinning with thoughts about the upcoming ceremony. She had never been to Buckingham Palace, never met any members of the royal family, and never expected to be recognized for simply doing her job with love and dedication. She wondered what she would say if the king spoke to her directly, and whether she would be able to find the right words to express her gratitude for the honor. The 2 weeks leading up to the palace ceremony passed like a whirlwind for Kate. News of her recognition had spread throughout the hospital. and she found herself constantly receiving congratulations from colleagues, patients, and their families. Emma was particularly excited about Kate's honor, and had drawn a special picture of Kate wearing a crown, which she insisted Kate should take to show the king. Kate had never owned a formal dress suitable for a royal ceremony, so she spent her weekend off shopping for something appropriate. The sales assistant at the department store was thrilled to help her find the perfect outfit when Kate explained the reason for her purchase. Together they selected a navy blue dress with a modest neckline and elegant lines that would be both respectful and flattering for such an important occasion. Margaret, who was still recovering at the hospital, became Kate's unofficial advisor on royal protocol. The elderly woman had grown up during a time when meeting members of the royal family was considered one of life's greatest honors, and she spent hours coaching Kate on proper etiquette. Margaret taught her how to curtsy, when to speak, and what topics would be appropriate for conversation if the king chose to talk with her. Emma's condition had been improving steadily, and her doctors were cautiously optimistic about her response to treatment. The little girl insisted that Kate's upcoming meeting with the king was a sign that good things were happening for everyone she loved. Emma had become something of a celebrity among the other children in the ward, proudly telling everyone that her special nurse was going to meet the king because she was a hero. Kate tried to explain to Emma that she wasn't a hero, just a nurse doing her job, but the little girl wouldn't hear any of it. In Emma's eyes, Kate had saved her grandmother and brought them together during the scariest time of their lives. That made Kate the bravest person Emma had ever known, and she was certain the king would see Kate the same way she did. The morning of the ceremony arrived with typical London drizzle, but Kate's nervous excitement made everything seem bright and beautiful. She had barely slept the night before, running through possible conversations in her mind and practicing her curtsy one more time before bed. Kate arrived at the hospital early to check on her patients and ensure all her responsibilities were covered during her absence. Emma was awake and waiting for her with a small wrapped gift. Inside the carefully folded paper was a bracelet that Emma had made from colorful beads during her art therapy sessions. Emma explained that she wanted Kate to wear something special that would remind her of all the patients who loved and appreciated her. Kate felt tears welling up in her eyes as she fastened the simple bracelet around her wrist. Margaret had arranged for a friend to drive Kate to Buckingham Palace, since she was too nervous to trust herself with public transportation on such an important day. The older woman insisted on helping Kate with her final preparations, checking that her dress was perfect and her hair was properly arranged. Margaret told Kate that she looked like a princess herself, and that the king would be honored to meet such a dedicated nurse. The drive through London to Buckingham Palace seemed both endless and far too short. Kate watched the familiar streets pass by her window, thinking about how her ordinary life had led to this extraordinary moment. She thought about all the patients she had cared for over the years, all the families she had comforted during difficult times, and all the small acts of kindness that had somehow culminated in this recognition. When the palace gates came into view, Kate felt her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. The grandeur of the building was overwhelming, with its imposing facade and perfectly manicured gardens. Security guards checked her identification and provided her with a visitor's badge, treating her with a respect and courtesy that made her feel both important and humble at the same time. Kate was escorted through corridors lined with priceless artwork and historical artifacts, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished floors. She was joined by the 3 other nurses being honored that day, and together they were briefed on the ceremony procedures by a palace official who spoke with quiet dignity about the significance of the recognition they were about to receive. The waiting room where they gathered was elegantly furnished but comfortable, designed to help honored guests feel at ease before meeting members of the royal family. Kate sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, trying to calm her racing heart and remember all of Margaret's advice about proper etiquette. She touched Emma's bracelet gently, drawing strength from the reminder of why she had chosen nursing as her career. A palace aide appeared and announced that it was time for the ceremony to begin. Kate and her fellow nurses were led down another corridor toward the room where they would meet the king. With each step, Kate felt the weight of the moment growing heavier on her shoulders. She was about to meet one of the most important people in the world, not because of any grand achievement or heroic deed, but simply because she had chosen to care for others with all her heart. As they approached the ornate doors of the ceremony room, Kate took a deep breath and reminded herself that she was representing not just herself, but all the nurses and healthcare workers who dedicated their lives to helping others. She thought about Emma's bright smile, Margaret's grateful tears, and all the patients whose lives she had been privileged to touch. This moment belonged to all of them, and Kate was determined to accept the honor with the grace and dignity they deserved. The doors opened, and Kate stepped forward into the most important moment of her professional life, carrying with her the love and hope of everyone she had ever cared for during her years of service at St. Mary's Hospital. The ceremony room was breathtakingly beautiful, with tall windows that allowed natural light to illuminate the rich tapestries and golden accents that adorned the walls. Kate and the other 3 nurses were positioned in a semicircle, each standing behind a small podium that held their commendation certificates. Palace staff moved quietly around the room, making final preparations for the king's arrival. Kate felt a moment of panic when she realized how many people were present for the ceremony. In addition to palace officials and photographers, there were representatives from the hospital administration, local government officials, and several reporters who had been invited to document the recognition of healthcare heroes. Kate had expected a small private ceremony, and the formal atmosphere made her feel even more nervous about saying or doing something inappropriate. The room fell completely silent when the king entered, accompanied by his private secretary and security detail. Kate was struck immediately by how much more approachable he seemed in person than in the formal portraits she had seen throughout her life. He walked with quiet dignity but genuine warmth, making eye contact with each of the nurses as he moved to his position at the front of the room. The king began the ceremony by speaking about the essential role that healthcare workers play in society, especially during times of crisis and uncertainty. His words were heartfelt and personal, clearly coming from someone who had witnessed firsthand the dedication and sacrifice of medical professionals. Kate found herself relaxing slightly as she listened to his genuine appreciation for the work she and her colleagues performed every day. When the king began presenting the individual commendations, Kate watched as each of her fellow nurses stepped forward to receive their recognition. Each presentation was personalized, with the king speaking about the specific actions that had earned that person the honor. Kate was amazed by how much detail he knew about each nurse's contributions during the building collapse crisis and other challenging situations they had handled. Kate was the 3rd nurse to be called forward, and her legs felt shaky as she approached the king. She executed what she hoped was an acceptable curtsy, drawing on all of Margaret's patient coaching during the previous weeks. The king smiled warmly at her obvious nervousness and spoke in a gentle voice that immediately put her more at ease. He began by thanking Kate for her years of dedicated service to the children in St. Mary's pediatric ward, mentioning specifically how many families had been comforted by her compassionate care during their most difficult times. Kate was surprised that he knew so many details about her work history and the positive impact she had made on countless patients and their loved ones over the years. The king then spoke about the night of the building collapse, describing how Kate had gone far beyond her normal duties to help Emma reunite with her grandmother during a traumatic and frightening experience. He explained that her actions had demonstrated the very best qualities of the nursing profession: selflessness, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to caring for others even when it required personal sacrifice. As the king placed the commendation medal around Kate's neck, he leaned slightly closer and spoke in a voice that only she could hear. He told her that during his visit to the hospital that night, he had spent several minutes watching Emma sleep peacefully beside her grandmother, and seeing that reunion had been one of the most moving moments of his entire visit. He wanted Kate to know that her kindness had created a moment of pure love and healing that would stay with him forever. Kate felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as the king continued speaking quietly to her. He mentioned that he had learned about Emma's ongoing battle with cancer and her remarkable courage throughout her treatment. The king asked Kate to give Emma his personal regards and to tell her that he would be thinking of her and praying for her complete recovery. The formal presentation concluded, but the king indicated that he would like to speak privately with each of the honored nurses for a few additional minutes. When Kate's turn came for this private conversation, she found herself sitting across from the king in a smaller, more intimate room adjacent to the main ceremony hall. The formal atmosphere had been replaced by something that felt almost like a friendly chat between two people who cared deeply about helping others. The king asked Kate about her background and what had inspired her to become a nurse. Kate found herself speaking more freely than she had expected, telling him about her childhood dream of helping sick children and how working in the pediatric ward had become her calling in life. She shared stories about some of her most memorable patients and the lessons they had taught her about courage, hope, and the power of human connection. Kate was amazed when the king began sharing his own experiences visiting hospitals and meeting healthcare workers throughout the country. He spoke with genuine emotion about the dedication he had witnessed and the important role that nurses play in healing not just physical ailments, but also providing emotional support to patients and families during their most vulnerable moments. The conversation turned to Emma, and Kate found herself describing the little girl's incredible spirit and determination. She told the king about Emma's artwork, her love of stories, and the way she managed to find joy and hope even during the most difficult parts of her treatment. The king listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about Emma's progress and expressing his sincere hope for her recovery. As their private meeting drew to a close, the king made a request that left Kate speechless. He asked if it would be possible for him to visit Emma personally, not as part of any official royal engagement, but simply as someone who had been moved by her story and wanted to meet the brave little girl who had captured his heart during that brief glimpse on the night of the building collapse. 3 days later, Kate arrived at work to find the hospital once again buzzing with preparations for another royal visit. This time, however, she was part of the planning process. The king had requested that his visit to Emma be kept as informal and private as possible, with only essential medical staff and security personnel present. He wanted Emma to feel comfortable and natural during their meeting, without the pressure of formal protocols or ceremonial procedures. Kate spent the morning preparing Emma for the visit. Though the little girl was almost too excited to sit still, Emma had been working on a special drawing for the king, featuring a castle surrounded by flowers and happy children playing in the gardens. She had also written a short letter in her careful 6-year-old handwriting, thanking the king for caring about sick children and promising to be brave during the rest of her treatment. Margaret had been moved to a chair beside Emma's bed so she could be present for this historic moment. The elderly woman had tears in her eyes as she watched her granddaughter prepare for what might be the most important meeting of the little girl's life. Margaret kept smoothing Emma's hair and adjusting her favorite pink pajamas, wanting everything to be perfect for the royal visit. When the king arrived at the pediatric ward, he was dressed casually in a simple suit rather than formal ceremonial attire. Kate noticed immediately how this choice helped create a more relaxed atmosphere that would be less intimidating for a young child. The king's security detail remained in the hallway, giving the hospital room a sense of privacy and intimacy that would allow for genuine conversation. Emma's eyes grew wide when the king entered her room, but she wasn't frightened or overwhelmed as Kate had worried she might be. Instead, the little girl sat up straight in her bed and gave the king her biggest smile, the same radiant expression that had charmed every nurse and doctor who had cared for her during her long stay at the hospital. The king approached Emma's bedside with gentle steps and spoke to her in the same warm, caring voice he had used when talking privately with Kate at the palace. He complimented Emma on her beautiful artwork that decorated the walls around her bed, and he listened carefully as she explained each drawing and what it meant to her. Kate watched in amazement as Emma's natural confidence and joy seemed to put even the king at ease. Emma presented her special drawing and letter to the king with a formal little curtsy that she performed from her sitting position in the hospital bed. The king accepted her gifts with genuine delight, studying the artwork carefully and reading every word of her letter with obvious pleasure. He told Emma that her drawing was one of the most beautiful pictures he had ever received, and he promised to display it in a place of honor at the palace. The king spent nearly an hour talking with Emma about her favorite books, her dreams for the future, and her experiences in the hospital. Kate was moved to see how naturally they connected, with Emma chattering away as if she were talking to a beloved grandfather, rather than one of the most important people in the world. The king seemed genuinely interested in everything Emma had to say, asking thoughtful questions and sharing appropriate stories from his own experiences. When Emma began to show signs of tiredness, the king prepared to leave, but first he had a special surprise for her. He explained that he had brought along someone very special who wanted to meet her. Kate's heart skipped a beat as she wondered who this mysterious visitor might be. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. The king stepped aside, and through the doorway came a woman whose presence seemed to fill the room with warmth and light. Kate immediately recognized her as the queen, though she was dressed as simply and casually as the king had been. Emma gasped with pure joy and wonder, unable to believe that both the king and queen had come to visit her in her hospital room. The queen moved to Emma's bedside with the same gentle, caring manner as her husband, and Kate could see immediately why the royal couple was so beloved by people throughout the country. The queen admired Emma's artwork, listened to her stories, and spoke to her about her courage and strength in fighting her illness. Emma was completely captivated, hanging on every word and responding with the same natural confidence she had shown with the king. As the royal visit continued, Kate found herself stepping back to observe this extraordinary moment. She watched as the king and queen took turns reading to Emma from one of her favorite books, their voices gentle and soothing in the quiet hospital room. Margaret sat in her chair with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the kindness and attention being shown to her beloved granddaughter. The most magical moment came when the queen asked Emma if she would like to hear a special story about a brave princess who helped heal a kingdom through her kindness and courage. Emma nodded eagerly, and Kate listened along with everyone else as the queen told a beautiful tale that seemed to be created specifically for Emma, with characters and adventures that reflected the little girl's own journey through illness toward healing. As the story reached its conclusion, the queen spoke about how the brave princess in the tale had taught everyone in the kingdom about the power of hope and love in overcoming even the greatest challenges. Emma listened with rapt attention, clearly understanding that the story was really about her own brave battle against cancer and the inspiration she had provided to everyone who knew her. When the time came for the royal couple to leave, the king and queen each gave Emma gentle hugs and promised to keep her in their thoughts and prayers. The king told Emma that meeting her had been one of the greatest honors of his life, and the queen assured her that her artwork would have a permanent place at Buckingham Palace, where it would bring joy to everyone who saw it. As the king and queen prepared to walk toward the door, something unexpected happened that would become the moment Kate would remember for the rest of her life. Emma, despite her weakness from treatment, struggled to stand up in her bed. Kate moved quickly to help support her, but Emma gently waved her away, determined to do something important on her own. The little girl, standing on unsteady legs in her hospital bed, bowed her head deeply toward the king and queen in a gesture of pure respect and gratitude. The simple, heartfelt bow was so genuine and moving that everyone in the room fell completely silent. Even the king stood perfectly still, clearly moved beyond words by Emma's spontaneous expression of appreciation for their visit. In that moment of profound silence, Kate understood that she was witnessing something truly extraordinary. The crowd that had gathered in the hallway, the security personnel, the hospital staff, and even the royal couple themselves had all been touched by the pure grace and dignity of a 6-year-old girl who had chosen to honor her visitors despite her own physical struggles. Emma's simple bow had created a moment of reverence that transcended all the formal protocols and ceremonies that usually surrounded royal visits. The king slowly approached Emma's bedside one final time and gently helped her sit back down among her pillows. He spoke quietly to her about how much her gesture had meant to him and the queen, and how her courage and kindness had touched their hearts in ways that would stay with them forever. Emma smiled peacefully, content in knowing that she had properly thanked the special visitors who had brought so much joy to her difficult journey toward healing.